Marx goes on to say many other things. He talks about censorship. And this is a wonderful way he looks at censorship. He says he was against censorship. Again, you have a conflation in the mind of socialism or communism and censorship. You see, they are censored societies. You will not find a fiercer champion of freedom of speech than Karl Marx. He said censorship is bad in whatever situation it is. He says censorship can never be legitimate even when it is a law, just as slavery can never be legitimate even when it is a law. Why does he say slavery? Because in his time, slavery was a law, but he said it is illegitimate. Law and legitimacy are different. Likewise, he said censorship, even if it is a law, can never be legitimate. Even as slavery can never be the law, even if it is legitimate. That's how passionately he believed in a free speech and freedom of speech and expression. He says one must have loved freedom of the press like beauty to be able to defend it. I feel that the existence of what I really love is necessary and needed, and without it, my own being is neither fulfilled, satisfied, nor complete. This is Karl Marx speaking, not Aurobindo, not any spiritual godman, Because this is not mumbo jumbo. He's talking about human existence at its best, at its distilled best. And then he argues against a censorship regime, which is a brilliant argument, actually. He says, and I quote him, since people must consider uncensored publications as lawless, they will get used to considering lawlessness as free. Think about that. Since people must consider uncensored publications as lawless. If you have a censorship regime, people will say that government is trying to bring censorship. That's what you mean by regulation, right? Censorship of you can say this, you can't say this. Since people must consider uncensored publications as lawless, so if you have an uncensored publication, it is lawless. They will get used to the idea of considering lawlessness as free, freedom as lawless, and lawfulness as unfreedom. Freedom will become lawless and lawfulness will become unfreedom. അതായത് ക്രമേണ ജനങ്ങൾ സെൻസർ ചെയ്യപ്പെട്ട പ്രസിദ്ധീകരണങ്ങൾ നിയമമില്ലായ്മയാണ്, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ നിയമരാഹിത്യം, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ നിയമരഹിതമാണ്, നിയമരാഹിത്യം ഉള്ളതാണെന്ന് എന്ന് കരുതി തുടങ്ങിയാൽ നിയമരാഹിത്യം സ്വതന്ത്രമായി കരുതുകയും നിയമരാഹിത്യം സ്വാതന്ത്ര്യമായി കരുതുകയും സ്വാതന്ത്ര്യം നിയമമില്ലായ്മയായി കരുതുകയും നിയമപാലനം സ്വാതന്ത്ര്യമില്ലായ്മയായി കരുതുകയും നടക്കുമെന്നുള്ളതാണ്. അതായത് everything will be stood on its head. And it's a brilliant argument. It's a brilliant logical argument. This was the mental acuity of the man. And he used it to justify why censorship is no, never, never. He's aware of the shortcomings of the free press. He says free press cannot be controlled and bribed. It cannot be said, you do this, you do this. You can be free to this extent. He says the free press will be, he calls it, the need for the journalism, he says, is what he calls folk press. Folk as in VOLKPRESS, folk presser, people's press. This is the social media of today. He had seen it then. Look at the prescience of the man. He's talking of exactly this social media. He says it will reflect the real life with all its contradictions, trials and errors. It is likely to make mistakes, exaggerate, distort, but will learn from its mistakes. This is the idea of his folk press. It's a kind of idea of the public sphere, a freewheeling public sphere. And he says, it is the people's outspoken self-confession, a space for people's... This is exactly the social media description. You can't have described social media so well, not even knowing that technologically it was going to happen. a century later, or 2 centuries later. And he said United States is certainly the place which has most freedom of press, but he says because they have commercialized it, the market will become a bigger danger for the press than the state. He foretold that, and it's indeed what is happening. Look at the way the big newspapers in the United States are reporting. Look at the way they're reporting Gaza, or not. Nowadays they don't even report it because killing children has become so normal, it is not news anymore. Every day there are children being killed there, bombed by Israel with American weapons. New York Times, Washington Post, they are all very, very wary and circumspect and sleazy when it comes to anything which is anti-Israel. They see it as, they believe, they fall into the trap of thinking if you say anti-Israel, it's anti-Semitism, even though you may be actually attacking Zionism, which is what Benjamin Netanyahu is. He's a Zionist. So he says, and he has this wonderful thing. He says he believes in a free press, and he says, and I quote him, the first freedom of the press, the first freedom of the press is not to be a business. Because he knows the moment market becomes the paradigm of the press, it becomes a bigger threat than the state. I have been a journalist in all my life. I've lived in the era of the state control of the press. I was in Doordarshan through a lot of my formative years. I know that it was always controlled. It was government point of view. You were a propaganda arm of the government. And I've also been in the private media, as you know. But I can see the danger of the market as far, far more serious than the danger of the state. Especially in the neoliberal age that we live in now. The market is the determining factor. The corporates are the determining factor. Digital media, Google. Today, look at who is regulating the media, the platforms. In India, the difference is in the United States and in Europe, they are talking about regulating the big media. Leela Khan was, when Biden became president, he set up the commission, Federal Trade Commission, FTC, headed by Leela Khan, a 35-year-old woman of British origin, of South Asian origin, but born in Britain. Her mandate is to cut these big media to size, split them into smaller, because the bigger the media, the lower the democracy. Robert McChesney has said, the richer the media, the poorer that democracy. But it's work in progress. European Union has got strong regulations now in place against internet. Google is being challenged on many fronts. Because Google pretends to be a platform and it suits them, but it is a purveyor of information and it suits them. So when it's purveying content, the owners of the content, including newspapers and others from which the news is taken, are asking for money, a share of the revenue. They've had to concede in Australia, they're having to concede now in Europe. So it's going to become a kind of, chain effect. But the short point I'm making is in Europe and America, they are restraining the platforms, the means of dissemination. Make sure that no one power monopoly emerges there. It's paradoxical that in the US, they are fighting that monopoly. Whereas in India, the entire exercise of the government at the center is how to regulate in terms of content, not in terms of size. How do you regulate what they can say? How do you regulate how much they can say against the establishment? When does something you say against the establishment becomes anti-national? It should be easy enough for them to file cases against you. This is the direction. This is a big difference. Whereas here what they should be doing is to control the size of this, the big players. You can't name these two big players anymore because apparently it's anti-national. So I'll follow Rahul Gandhi's example and say A1 and A2 own 90% of the media in this country. But there's no move to look at that. There's no move towards cross-media restrictions, which a supposedly non-regulated market like the US had long back. Why do you have New York Times, Washington Post? Because they cannot expand beyond their turf, beyond a point outside of that. You can only be big in particular areas. They had limits of growth. Geographically, in terms of size, in terms of spread, in terms of multimedia. If I'm owning a newspaper, I cannot run a television channel there. I cannot also run a FM radio station. Whereas here you don't have cross-media restrictions. You can do all of this. You're creating monopolies and creating censorship with those monopolies. It's easier to censor because once you have the monopolies, you have the purse strings, you have the regulatory mechanism, you can send the ED, CBI and all after them, and everyone will come to heel. You'll have a very pliant press. So I'll end by saying we have to therefore look, and I think Kairali should set the example of rethinking this whole media practice. Bring Marx back center stage. I could not talk about Gandhi enough, but Gandhi, of course, was the biggest journalist we have seen in this part of the world in the next century, in the 20th century. He published, he was editing 4 magazines or journals at one time: Harijan, Indian Opinion, Young India, Navjeevan. Navjeevan in 1919, in 2019 it completed 100 years. Indian Opinion in 1903. Harijan in 1931, I think, but lasted for 20 years. Young India also around the same time. But he was editing constantly. Imagine editing 4 journals simultaneously at the same time. And he says in his autobiography, my idea of satyagraha came to me through my writings in the Indian Opinion. In other words, when he wrote, he's having a dialogue with the page, or with his thoughts. He's expressing his thoughts and he's having a dialogue, and he's clarifying his thoughts and refining his thoughts. And the weapon of satyagraha with which he fought the British colonial ruler emerged in his mind. So this is the power of the journalism that we have lived in. We have the influence of Marx here, we have the influence of Gandhi here, but we ourselves have not looked at them as journalists the way we should be. So I would say that once you look at these stalwarts, you will find the clue to reimagining journalism, to reinventing journalism, to thinking out of the box and creating a new genre of journalism that is relevant to the times, that has a transformative quality, that the new generation is in sync with, and makes a difference to all of our lives. This, I think, is the message I wanted to convey, and I'm sure the first group of, I want to end by saying that in journalism sometimes you have paradoxes. When I started with the first, say, private channel in India, the chief minister of the time was K. Karunakaran. He played a very enabling role in creating that channel in terms of giving us the right of way through cable, because we had cable and satellite. The cable network using the electricity poles and so on. And it is paradoxical because Karunakaran knew even then, and as I am now, that my ideological persuasion is left. It is not so much with the Congress. And yet he did it. And to be fair to him, throughout he never called me once asking for a job for someone or saying that this was too wrong, what you did was wrong, you should not have done. Not once. But that's how it should be. I'm happy that today's function we are having the Chief Minister of the state and the Leader of the Opposition. In neighboring Tamil Nadu, where I come from, it's impossible. They will never come on the same platform. Particularly when Jayalalitha and say, the predecessors were there. So in journalism, your ideology is certainly there, but you don't wear it on your sleeve. Asianet called out the whole thing called ISRO spy scandal. We said it's nonsense. There's no spy there, no scandal there. It is some petty politics and part of the police establishment was complicit. We said that. And I had to go and apply for anticipatory bail in Cochin because the police, under the left government at time, Mr. E.K. Nayanar, I went and told him and I got the summons. He said, "Adhu prashna illa, bail nu poyal avaru choikkum, bail granted nu parayum." So I said, "Okay, thank you." And I went and got it. But that's fine, that's how it is. So therefore, there was no antipathy that, the police department might have been upset with me, but not the government of the day. So this is what I think, you can pursue your journalism without forsaking your ideologies, your principles, your faith, provided you believe that this profession is something for the people, must have a transformative impact, and must have a honesty and transparency about it. And I'm sure, I'm not suggesting that all this is not being followed, but I think because of this whole imitative process of one channel imitating another channel, because you have to be on the same page, we have forgotten the cardinal rules and core principles of journalism. Why journalism? What is the reason for journalism? What is the raison d'etre, the reason for the very existence of this creature called journalism? We should rediscover that, and I think we have before us stalwarts who have shown how you can adapt the media to the needs of the time. Thank you very much.